Personalities like John Zachary DeLorean come along once in a blue moon. Flamboyant, extravagant, and full of drive and ambition, he represented all that is best and worst about capitalism. You might have heard of the DMC-12. You've probably heard of its colloquial name, the DeLorean. You've almost certainly heard of that silver time machine car from Back to the Future. This unique piece of engineering owes its roots to one man. There's no way to sugarcoat this. As a car, it was pretty terrible. As a result of several poor decisions and numerous external factors, the DeLorean Motor Company was fast running out of cash. And this begs the age-old question, is it ever ethical to facilitate Colombian cocaine smuggling deals to save the company you love? This was the story running through the newspapers at the time, and DeLorean's reputation never fully recovered. But how true was it? Well, the truth is far murkier and shadier than some might have you believe. This video touches on the car, but is more about the person behind it. John Zachary DeLorean was born on January 6, 1925. His father, whose name was anglicized to Zachary, was Romanian, while his mother Catherine was Hungarian. John was the eldest of 4 boys and grew up in the Detroit area of Michigan. His father Zachary was prone to violent outbursts and fits of rage, prompting Catherine to move with the boys to live with her sister in Los Angeles. The couple divorced in 1942. Zachary eventually became a drug addict and spent most of the rest of his life in shelters while Catherine resettled back in Detroit. Already, we see the potentially traumatic roots John DeLorean grew up in. He began working on his studies in 1943 when he was called up to serve in World War II. After receiving an honorable discharge in 1946, he took several different jobs, completed his manufacturing engineering degree, and then finished a master's in automotive engineering from the Chrysler Institute in 1952. After achieving his master's, he went straight into the ranks at Chrysler, working for less than a year before accepting an offer from Packard Motor Company for a massive salary of $14,000. Shortly thereafter, he moved to GM, where he would make even more, a reported $16,000. It didn't take John long to work his way up the ranks at GM. He was credited with designing the iconic Pontiac GTO and Pontiac Firebird. In 1965, age 40, he became the head of Chevrolet, the youngest in GM's history. By 1972, he was vice president of the entire GM company. All this ambition and money came with the almost inevitable consequences of several failed marriages and an obviously unsettled work-life balance. He's reported to have divorced his first wife of 14 years after problems with workaholism. The marriage fell apart in 1969. Soon after, he married 20-year-old actress Kelly Harmon, but they divorced in 1972. He then adopted his son Zachary, as he didn't expect to marry again. But a few months later, in May 1973, he married Christina Ferrare. She was 23. A few years later, in 1978, John and Christina would welcome Catherine, their daughter, assumingly named after his mother. However, just 1 month before their 1973 wedding, he quit as the GM vice president and took an unpaid role as the head of the National Alliance of Businessmen. He would re-emerge in the automotive world with DeLorean Motor Company, founded in Detroit on October 24, 1975. DMC set up their production factory in Belfast, Northern Ireland, with a significant investment of £80 million from the British government. Belfast was a war-torn area at the peak of the Troubles in Ireland. British officials believed opening a factory would benefit the city economically by providing thousands of jobs. Private investors provided the rest of the capital. John DeLorean set the DeLorean Motor Company, or DMC, up with the ambition of building his dream car. He brought in Giorgetto Giugiaro, the Italian designer responsible for the Lotus Esprit, the Volkswagen Golf MK1, the Maserati Ghibli, and other household names. The DMC-12 was supposed to look futuristic. Space age is probably a good word to describe it. The gold-wing doors were unique, to say the least, and the unpainted stainless steel meant it looked like nothing else on the road. Production began in earnest in 1981. Unfortunately, John was a designer at heart. He wasn't an accountant and didn't have adequate money skills. Couple this with a reluctance to relinquish any form of control or take advice from others, plus a glamorous lifestyle, jaw sculpting, plastic surgery, and a hint of narcissism, and it was a recipe for disaster. The dream started to turn sour when the costs became public. The DMC-12 had been so named because John wanted to market the car for $12,000, a respectable price for a futuristic-looking sports car. However, poor financial planning and understanding meant the car had to be sold for more than double that, and buyers could only get their hands on one for $25,000. This was far more expensive than the average car at the time, which cost around $10,000. It was even more pricey than top-spec American muscle cars. The market, therefore, scarcely existed. When reports of the DMC-12's drivability started coming in, things dropped off a cliff. The engine was originally supposed to be a rotary from the Mazda RX-7. Because he didn't want to wait, John went with the Renault V6 developed in collaboration with Peugeot and Volvo. It made 130 horsepower. Because DMC was so rushed to get to production, engineers simply borrowed components from other vehicles. Alone, this is fine. Plenty of startups take this approach, but the DMC-12 borrowed just about everything. It was also sluggish because the stainless steel panels were so heavy. With the 5-speed manual, it could reach 60 miles an hour in 9.5 seconds, and the automatic gearbox was far too slow compared with American competitors. The weight and the rush meant the DMC-12 was also terrible at handling. As Top Gear's Chris Harris puts it, I mean, it's relatively controllable, but on the public road, it's an accident waiting to happen. And so John DeLorean had made a sports car that wasn't sporty, was built in a hurry using parts from whatever the engineers could find, and cost twice the average American vehicle. Who would buy such a car? The answer was, film producers aside, very few. It was a sad but somewhat predictable turn of events. In fact, by the time the DeLorean Motor Company was shut down in 1983, only 9,000 DMC-12s had been constructed. In February 1982, DMC went into receivership and John desperately needed more investors to save it from bankruptcy. Despite piquing interest due to its iconic design, the DMC-12's market price was too high for most buyers to even consider it. Combined with an economic recession, John DeLorean's company quickly found itself in turbulent financial waters. It was estimated that DMC had debts of around $175 million after half of the 7,000 DMC-12s built by early 1982 did not sell. And here we find the context for John DeLorean's infamous drug deal. The popular version of the story has DeLorean approaching a friend and former neighbor, James Timothy Hoffman, asking him to set up a cocaine deal to help appropriate the funds needed to save the DeLorean Motor Company. Hoffman was a convicted drug smuggler turned FBI informant, and the agency caught DeLorean in a Los Angeles airport hotel room having agreed to a $24 million deal. He was arrested on 8 counts of drug trafficking on October 19, 1982. He spent 11 days in jail while his bail was raised. He would eventually be acquitted in August 1984 as his attorney successfully proved that the FBI had coerced him into the deal in a case of entrapment. Although it might sound like a typical situation of the rich getting away with whatever they want, every story got 2 sides, and in this case, John DeLorean's account is well worth hearing. Hoffman claimed that DeLorean approached him first, but one key witness proved this to be false. Carol Winkler, John's administrative assistant at that time, showed call logs that proved Hoffman initiated the conversation. There was much more to it too. Hoffman had first called John on June 28, 1982, but DeLorean had been so busy meeting with other investors that they only met face to face on July 11th. Over time, Hoffman suggested more and more audacious deals and financial incentives. By September, DeLorean was suspicious he was getting involved in narcotics or organized crime. Specifically, he had been charged with conspiracy to obtain and distribute 55 pounds of cocaine. He sought advice from Tom Kimmerly, DMC's corporate attorney, who advised stalling Hoffman. However, Hoffman then issued a relatively clear threat that his daughter Catherine would be harmed if he didn't go through with the deal. Under these circumstances, John flew to LA to meet Hoffman and another man, an undercover FBI agent named Benedict Tisa, in an airport motel room. DeLorean agreed to fund the $24 million cocaine deal, which he believed involved drugs being smuggled in from Colombia for sale in the US. During this exchange, he was caught on tape describing the white powder in a case before him as better than gold. At one point, he proposed a toast to the deal. He would later claim to have been playing along the whole time. Another FBI agent then entered the room, identified himself, and promptly arrested John DeLorean for a narcotics law violation. But DeLorean had left a note with his attorney in New York, in which he detailed a suspected criminal plot and named everyone he thought was involved. His attorney was instructed to only open the letter if he didn't return. John also paid Hoffman in artificial shares from a fake shell company, so he never exchanged real funds. Are these the actions of a guilty man? There was further damning evidence. All of Hoffman's conversations with DeLorean were recorded, apart from a suspicious 47-minute gap in the tape when John claimed he told Hoffman he wouldn't get involved in illegal activity. A former DEA agent, Gerald Scotti, also testified that Hoffman had read about DMC's financial troubles in a Wall Street Journal article and had bragged he would get John DeLorean. Tisa, the agent with Hoffman in the hotel room, admitted a similar thing about Hoffman and even got caught on open mic being told off by his superiors. His words were heard in a room full of journalists. The final nail in the coffin was Hoffman's record. He was found to be a serial liar who would routinely make things up for his own benefit. In contrast, John DeLorean had a clean criminal record. The jury deliberated for 30 hours and eventually concluded John DeLorean was not guilty due to FBI entrapment. His attorney, Howard Weitzman, made a statement saying, "The message that has been sent to this country at large is that we won't tolerate the type of conduct the government involved in this particular incident." This was John's official defense and the story he and his attorney would stick to. He survived a prison sentence because of it. It's either a true story revealing the horrors of being manipulated and framed by the government, or a carefully twisted version of the truth, in which DeLorean manages to make himself seem like the victim. The reality isn't really known. DeLorean spoke of the horrors he and his family had gone through over the previous 2 years. He sounded knocked down, but he wasn't entirely defeated just yet. Following the verdict, he and his wife Christina became born-again Christians. Whether that was thankfulness or penance, nobody knows for sure. Although John had won his court case, things had gone downhill. On the same day of his arrest, October 19, 1982, the British government forced the Belfast factory to completely shut down, seizing it as part of debt collection. Liquidation processes immediately began as DMC filed for bankruptcy 1 week later. There was, however, one bright spark. Back to the Future, directed by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, used the DMC-12 as the infamous time machine. The plot initially had a laser machine, which became a fridge. However, the creators were worried about children getting stuck in refrigerators when playing, so the idea was scrapped. They then turned to an automotive time machine. Ford offered $75,000 to the producers if they would use the Mustang, but Gale felt it didn't match Doc Brown's character, and thus the DMC-12 was selected instead. This did little to help DeLorean's legal and financial troubles, but it did cement a place in pop culture history, giving him and the company something to be remembered for. On September 21st, 1985, he was back in court, this time on 15 counts of racketeering, fraud, and tax evasion charges. He was accused of siphoning money from his initial 140 investors. DMC had received funds prior to the official incorporation of the company. In 1974, Oppenheimer and Company, a New York investment bank, brokered a deal. Millions of dollars were placed into a DMC subsidiary, the DeLorean Research Limited Partnership. Laws at the time allowed this money to be written off, but it was missing, and nobody could trace where it had really gone. The defense successfully argued that the missing money had been supplied to Colin Chapman's Lotus as a loan. They said the money had been sent to a Swiss company account in Panama City named General Product Development Services, or GPD. This company had been contracted for the R&D of the DMC-12. This company allegedly subcontracted Lotus, the brains behind much of the operation. DeLorean sent relatively small amounts of money Lotus's way, but nothing as substantial as what was missing. Lotus never received any considerable sum from GPD, and Colin Chapman's sad death at the start of the investigation meant the trail went cold. He was rumored to be one of the only people who knew where the money really went. Without any other evidence, John DeLorean's defense argued that the loan had been sent with good intent and no wrongdoing could be proven. Nobody knows what happened to the money, but almost $18 million was unaccounted for. Prosecutors suspected DeLorean had used some of it for personal expenditure and paying off personal loans, but it could never be proved. At the time of his October 1982 arrest, John DeLorean was personally worth about $28 million, mostly thanks to real estate investments. Over the following years, John DeLorean fought more than 40 legal cases, including one brought by attorneys for unpaid fees amounting to millions of dollars. The fallout of all these trials meant John's net worth plummeted, and in 1999 he filed for bankruptcy, owing creditors around $85 million. He sold his 434-acre Bedminster estate in 2000 to a well-known businessman named Donald Trump, the future president. As you might expect, Trump turned it into a golf course. We're still determining if John DeLorean was a crook or an overambitious businessman who got involved with the wrong crowds. Perhaps nobody will ever know the truth of the matter. DeLorean sadly passed away in New Jersey's Overlook Hospital in 2005 after a stroke. He spent his final years trying to resurrect the DeLorean Motor Company and proposed a new car, the DMC-2. He attempted to raise funds to start afresh by selling watches and glasses under the brand DeLorean Time. Even his tombstone is decorated with the DMC-12, its gull-wing doors open. The dream never died, no matter how impractical and impossible it might have looked. And when you think about it, this is the story of John DeLorean. He was ambitious, attempting to make something nobody had ever seen before. And he succeeded, although not quite in the way he might have intended. The DMC-12 was only immortalized in film because of DeLorean's incessant trait of never giving up. And that's something worth remembering him for. Alec Baldwin portrayed John in the film Framing John DeLorean. Baldwin seems to have believed in John's guilt, claiming he hurt a lot of people. He's quoted as saying, "John is a cautionary tale. This is an appropriate thought to conclude with." The true extent of John's moral code will never be known for sure. Still, he leaves behind a little piece of futuristic engineering entertainment. Not the best sports car the world has ever seen, in fact, one of the worst, but the best automotive time machine history has ever had the pleasure to encounter.